It was disappointment for the tifosi last weekend. After 2 weeks of hype building up for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix and the expectation that it was going to be another big points haul, it just simply didn't work out for Ferrari and their fans. It started out at qualifying, with Carlos Sainz crashing out in Q2. While he was able to set a time good enough to get him to Q3, he wasn't able to participate any further after that. And in a qualifying session that was a complete mess, with 5 red flags and scattered rain showers, Ferrari weren't able to take advantage at all. P2 for Charles Leclerc, P10 for Carlos Sainz after that crash. At the sprint, it wasn't any better. Leclerc, per motorsport.com, had mentioned that graining was an issue for the F175. And while the Monegasque did have a great start, beating Max Verstappen down into the Tamburello chicane, they weren't able to match the race pace of the Red Bulls. And a huge reason for this was the graining. The Ferrari struggled to maintain their pace on the softs for the entirety of the race. Leclerc eventually lost the lead to the reigning drivers' champion and was left chasing for the rest of the sprint. Sainz, meanwhile, was able to recover to 4th on the grid for the start of the race. However, it was at the race itself that Ferrari's problems were compounded. The first casualty for Ferrari, and the race in general, was Carlos Sainz. The Spaniard was left beached on the gravel at turn 2 after a first lap collision with McLaren's Daniel Ricciardo. While the Aussie was able to rescue his car and continue, Sainz was left stranded and unable to continue. This is the second DNF in a row for the 27-year-old, and another premature end to what has most likely been a frustrating weekend for him. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc, who was able to get through the first lap of the Grand Prix unscathed, struggled to keep up with the Red Bulls, who seemed to have found a fix to the reliability issues that had plagued them for the first 3 races. The pace of Verstappen and Sergio Perez proved to be too much for Leclerc, who was left fighting on his own after Sainz's early exit from the race. And it all eventually came to a boiling point in the dying hours of the race. With fresh, soft tyres and Verstappen already far into the lead, Leclerc went off at the very anti-Alto chicane while trying to chase down Perez for 2nd place. The young Ferrari driver fell all the way to 9th before charging to 6th in the final laps. The race ended in the most horrible fashion for the Maranello outfit, with a Red Bull 1-2 on home soil and 6th for the only Ferrari car still running at the end of the race. Lando Norris, who was still having a great weekend, inherited P3 from Leclerc and rounded out the podium finishers. Speaking after the race, Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto said per F1i.com's Philip Van Osten that he has no regrets about asking Leclerc to push, saying that mistakes like that are part of the job. When asked if tyre degradation was a factor after Leclerc stopped for a 2nd time, as opposed to the one-stop strategy everyone else was running, Binotto said that it was a strategic decision and not one that concerned how the F175 managed its tyres. In the end, it was a terrible weekend overall for Ferrari, and a huge blow to the momentum they've sustained for the past 3 years. To add to that, Red Bull, who has been touted their biggest rival for the championship this year, they were spectacular the entire weekend, with Verstappen finishing at the top in qualifying, sprint race, and the race itself. Perez, meanwhile, looked like his usual best, consistent and calculated in attack, while aggressive in defence. Meanwhile, Mercedes' struggles still continue. Lewis Hamilton was unlike himself at all, barely getting out of Q1 by the skin of his teeth, and barely looked like he was in contention for any points at all. In the end, the former world champion finished 13th in the race, stuck behind Pierre Gasly, who he'd been trying to overtake for over 20 laps. George Russell, in the other Mercedes, did bring home 5th, and as of the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, remains the only driver to finish every race in the top 5. However, the sight of former Merc driver Valtteri Bottas hunting down Russell, who replaced him this season, must have had an effect, while he has been a bright spot in the middle of a dismal season for the reigning Constructors' champions, whose car can once again be seen porpoising on its way down to the start-finish straight. It was also a mixed outcome for the rest of the pack. McLaren looked like they're back in the hunt after struggling to even get to the points earlier in the season. Lando Norris looked untouchable in 4th for the entirety of the race before eventually inheriting 3rd after Leclerc's spin. It was almost the perfect ending for the guys from Woking, if not for Daniel Ricciardo's earlier entanglement with Sainz in the other Ferrari. While Ricciardo was able to continue, he struggled to catch up with the rest of the pack, and never really looked like he was in contention for a points finish. He eventually paid a visit to the Ferrari motorhome after the race and apologised to Sainz. Meanwhile, Haas again secured some points courtesy of Kevin Magnussen, and Aston Martin, the last team without points, finally got their first top 10 finishes of the season, with Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll crossing the line in 8th and 10th respectively. Alpine, on the other hand, was another team with disappointing results. Fernando Alonso, after once again showing pace in Friday and Saturday, was forced to retire after coming together with Mick Schumacher in the early parts of the race. His second DNF of the season, and one race after coming home last in Melbourne. However, the big issue around the Formula 1 paddock is how will Ferrari respond after a disastrous Emilia Romagna Grand Prix? While we can say that Ferrari's relatively small points haul was partly caused by a mere mistake and some bad luck, it's undeniable that Ferrari are being caught by Red Bull. The Scuderia were soundly outperformed last weekend, and Sainz's crash and Leclerc's spin were just all of their problems compounding. It doesn't take just one weekend to define a championship favourite, and there were a lot of other factors that affected their overall performance. So we shouldn't say this early on that Red Bull now has the upper hand. Furthermore, this is a new experience for the young drivers of Ferrari. In particular, Carlos Sainz, who has never experienced being in a car contending for the championship, will have to show that he has what it takes to roll with the rest of the frontrunners. So far, the results haven't been good, but he has a lot of races ahead and a lot of chances to show his quality and hopefully get that first career win. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, is known as a hard racer. Who can forget his battles with Verstappen and Hamilton during his first season with Ferrari in 2019? Verstappen now looks like Leclerc's main rival for the driver's crown, and from how their previous encounters looked, we should be looking forward to some entertaining racing in the coming races. Overall, Ferrari must regroup and respond accordingly if they're going to hold off Red Bull. Their young drivers must step up and show they can consistently compete at the top of the grid. And their engineers must find a way to counteract Red Bull's rising pace if they want to bring home that championship their loyal fans have been longing for. How they will do that, no one knows. What we know, however, is that this battle between the top two teams will be epic.